20,000 pounds. Gone. That was the personal fortune Sir Isaac Newton lost in the summer of 1720. Adjusted for time, nearly $4 million today. He had decoded gravity. He had measured the orbits of planets. He had unlocked the mathematical laws governing the universe itself. Yet a single company, trading on a stretch of ocean he would never see, destroyed him financially in less than 6 months. The smartest man alive could not calculate the price of human madness. To understand his ruin, you must first understand a kingdom drowning. By 1719, Great Britain owed roughly £50 million in war debt, a staggering sum, a weight no traditional treasury could carry. Parliament was desperate. The crown was exposed. And into this regulatory void stepped a private enterprise with an audacious proposal. It was called the South Sea Company. Founded years earlier, it held a royal monopoly to trade with Spanish South America, a glittering promise of gold, silver, and silk flowing endlessly back to London. The reality was far quieter. The company had conducted almost no successful trade. Spain controlled the ports. War had blocked the routes. But the directors understood something deeper than commerce. They understood that a story, well told, could be worth more than any cargo. And in January 1720, they offered Parliament a deal that would change financial history. The company would absorb the entire national debt. In exchange, it would issue shares. The kingdom's debt would quietly transform into private speculation. The mechanism was elegant and dangerous. A joint stock company is simply a business that divides itself into tradable pieces of ownership called shares. Think of slicing a single estate into 1,000 paper deeds, each one rising or falling with the perceived fortune of the whole. The South Sea Company began issuing these shares aggressively, and the directors did something unprecedented. They lent money to the public, so the public could buy more of their own stock. It was a closed loop of borrowed optimism. Buyers borrowed to buy. Their purchases raised the price. The rising price justified more lending. The new lending fueled more buying. Each turn of the wheel inflated the value further. And no cargo, no trade, no actual commerce was required. In January, a single share traded near £128. By March, 200. By May, 550. The numbers were no longer attached to the world. They were attached only to the next buyer's hope. Isaac Newton was 77 years old, president of the Royal Society, master of the Royal Mint, a man whose mind had reshaped human understanding of the cosmos. He purchased South Sea shares early, a modest, calculated position, and in April of 1720, with shares climbing past £300, Newton did what any rational mathematician would do. He sold. He took his profit, reportedly around £7,000, a handsome return. He had measured the situation. He had observed the irrational climb, and he had withdrawn cleanly with the discipline of a scientist who trusted his own calculations. It should have ended there. A small footnote in the life of a giant. But Newton, like every man in London that spring, had to watch what happened next. And what happened next was something his equations could not predict. The price kept climbing. By June, South Sea shares passed £700. By late June, they crossed 1,000. Friends of Newton, men of lesser intellect, paraded their paper fortunes through the coffeehouses of Exchange Alley. London was no longer a city. It was a fever. Servants were buying shares. Clergymen were buying shares. Duchesses pawned jewelry to enter the market. New companies appeared overnight, promising ventures so absurd they seemed designed as parody. One famous prospectus offered shares in an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. It sold out in 5 hours. This was not investment. It was unprecedented euphoria, a financial delusion shared by an entire nation. And somewhere inside that delusion, the wisest mind in Europe began to feel the one force he had never accounted for. Not gravity, not motion. Regret. Newton broke his own discipline. In the summer of 1720, with prices near their peak, he re-entered the market. He bought back his position. He bought more. He committed, by most historical accounts, around 20,000 pounds of his personal wealth, a fortune accumulated over decades of careful service to the crown. Why did he do it? The man who had isolated the laws of motion could not isolate himself from the motion of the crowd. He watched his peers grow wealthy on paper. He calculated, perhaps, that the rise would continue just long enough. He was wrong by a matter of weeks. In August, whispers began. Foreign investors started withdrawing. The directors quietly sold their own holdings. A subtle tremor passed through Exchange Alley, almost imperceptible to those still buying. And then the structure, weightless and supported by nothing but belief, began to lose its altitude. September arrived like a verdict. Shares fell from 1,000 pounds to 700, then to 400, then to 200. By December, they traded near 124 pounds, almost exactly where they had begun the year. The paper fortunes evaporated. The borrowed money remained. Aristocrats were ruined. Merchants were ruined. Members of Parliament who had taken bribes in shares were ruined. The Bank of England intervened to prevent a total collapse of British credit. Several directors were arrested. Their estates were seized. And Isaac Newton, the man who had given humanity the mathematical key to the heavens, sat with 20,000 pounds in losses he could neither calculate away nor explain. He is said to have remarked, late in life, that he could measure the motion of the stars, but not the madness of men. Whether he spoke those exact words is uncertain. What is certain is that he never again spoke of the South Sea Company in public. The subject became, in his presence, a silence. There is a temptation to read this story as comedy. The great Newton undone by greed. But the truth is more profound and more troubling. Newton did not fail because he was foolish. He failed because intelligence is not the same as immunity. The faculties that allowed him to derive the laws of physics, pattern recognition, precision, confidence in his own analysis, were the very faculties that betrayed him in a market governed by collective emotion. Markets are not solved problems. They are unfolding social phenomena. The price of a share in 1720 was not determined by trade routes or cargo manifests. It was determined by what the next person believed the person after them would pay. This is the architecture of every speculative mania since. The Mississippi Company, the railway bubbles of the 19th century, the technology booms of the modern age. The instruments change, the mathematics improves, the asset class evolves. But the underlying machinery, borrowed optimism multiplied by social proof and accelerated by the fear of being left behind, has never been redesigned. Isaac Newton lived 7 more years after the collapse. He continued his duties at the Mint. He continued his scientific correspondence. He died in 1727, buried in Westminster Abbey, mourned as the greatest mind of his age. His financial wound never fully healed. Family papers suggest he avoided all conversation of South Sea, even decades later, as if the subject carried a private weight he refused to share. Perhaps this is the most human element of the entire story. Not the loss itself, but the silence around it. The recognition by a man who had spent his life pursuing certainty that he had encountered a force inside himself he could neither name nor master. The South Sea bubble did not destroy Britain. The kingdom recovered. New regulations emerged. The Bank of England consolidated power. The modern financial system in many ways was forged in the ashes of 1720. But it could not return what was taken from Newton. Not the money, the composure. He had spent a lifetime proving that the universe obeyed elegant, predictable laws. And in one summer, the marketplace had taught him that the human heart obeys none of them. Every fortune has a price. If the very architect of gravity could not escape the violent pull of human madness, what makes you think you can? In our next file, we open the gates to a terrifying global delict that brought the world's most powerful empire to its absolute knees. Proving that when the printing presses run red, money itself becomes the greatest illusion. To ensure you do not miss this approaching financial storm, subscribe to Golden Ruin and unlock the notifications now.